Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, first item here, last call for anyone who wants to join us for the baby boomer dilemma. Would you remind people what's going on this Wednesday, March 1st?
Yeah, we're just putting on a showing of a movie called The Baby Boomer Dilemma. This is put on by Doug Orchard and Doug Orchard Productions. This is an independent group that kind of went out and they kind of took a look at the retirement crisis, if you will, that we have in America. You know, most of us used to have pensions. You know, you go back about 4 decades ago, and over half of all workers had pensions with their jobs, and that is, of course, no longer the case. The few jobs that still come with them are typically going to be government-based jobs. And then you have to worry, are those pensions real? Will they really be able to pay you what they promise you? Anyway, this movie kind of looks into the retirement crisis, if you will, is kind of as they call it in the movie. And it's fascinating. They've got a lot of great guests. They have the Honorable David Walker, who's the former controller of the United States, interviewed in there with a lot of some economists and what have you. And it's we actually previewed it for our employees here about a week ago, and it was pretty good response and reaction from it. So if you'd like to attend, this is complimentary. This is on us. It's at Sarbin Theaters, their new one out on 204th and Harrison there out west by Elkhorn. But you have to register. So you do need to call in today to get registered. It'll be the last opportunity because it's this Wednesday at what time are we doing
6:30.
this? 6:30 p.m.
6:30 at ACX. But as David says, seating is limited, so you do need to call 402-369-7777. We'll give the number out again before the show ends, 402-369-7777. The Baby Boomer Dilemma. Wednesday night, March 1st at 6:30, the ACX Theater, the new one, out on 204th and Harrison. We'd love to have you join us. Now, if you're a client, you're familiar with this content. You've been through our process. It's more geared to those who are not part of Retire Smart yet, but we have had a few clients sign up to come as well. That's fine. 402-369-7777. David, I pay attention in our team meetings here at Retire Smart. I scribble notes as fast as I can. You go fast, as you always do. But the note I wanted to bring to the airwaves is you said strong technicals and weak fundamentals. What does that mean?
So when you look at technicals, this is looking at charts, if you will. So when we look at the markets, we can chart them, and there's a myriad of ways to do this. And I've been a bit of a market technician most of my career because the first gentleman that hired me and trained me, Bill Brewster, at Payne Weber all those years ago, kind of trained me on this stuff, and I've been fascinated and further educated myself into it. So the technicals help us understand timing sometimes in the market, right? Technical indicators, Chip, would be something that would tell you maybe when to buy or when to sell. Now, you're never going to be perfect at timing the market, but there are certain indicators that may forecast with some reliable probability the general trends of the markets. And exactly, we started the year off with a pretty good uptrend, and we were following through from the October lows of last year's market, which was down over 23% on the S&P at that time. And so it was a pretty good uptrend. However, it's ironic, I mentioned that to you Monday. Just this week, we saw that trend line actually broken already. And I talked about that in the meeting, that the trends look really good. And from a technical standpoint, the market looks rather healthy. But the fundamentals, not so much.
What are some
And
examples of
and
fundamentals?
so fundamentals are, we're looking at earnings. Are companies able to continue to sell more product, grow their revenue top line, and then grow their profits bottom line? And that is unfortunately not the case. We just saw a company who's never missed their comps in 12 years miss badly this week, Home Depot. This is a retailer that you know a lot of people would go to.
You figure that's
and,
rock
and
solid. Yeah.
and that stock got hit about 6% the day they released their earnings earlier in the week. The same day, we had Walmart report earnings. And, of course, Walmart is a pretty good bellwether of how the general economy is doing, right? Because Walmart's the number one retail shopping place we're going to go. And they actually beat their top-line revenue, and they beat their earnings. But their forecast was dismal. And they are telling you the consumer is tightening the belt, something we've been talking about here for the last couple of months, and something we actually informed our clients about at our State of the Market update, is that the consumer is running out of juice, so to speak, and we expect to see an earnings recession, which means we think there's a pretty good potential these markets could go lower this year in the next couple of quarters.
To the news we go, David. Big picture is where we like to start. Fox Business headline, U.S. trade deficit hit record in 2022. Now, David, I hear some economic analysts say Well, that's just a number. Trade deficit, that's no big deal. What is your take on it?
Well, look, you're going to have trade imbalances, right? But you can't have it go sideways too much, one benefiting someone else. So we're importing more goods and services than ever before. So that means we're relying on other trade partners to produce our goods and services. Now that is of a lot of concern for a lot of people, in particular, just in the last 3 years since we had the pandemic with COVID, it's come to light. People have realized that 96% of our pharmaceuticals, right, the prescription drugs people buy every month and depend on, are from one source, and maybe not exactly our most friendly source at the
Please don't say
particular
it's
time.
China.
It is China. So we are
Yeah.
depending on a country like China. So the import, the trade imbalance just tells us how healthy our internal economy is. In other words, if we're importing more things, that means we're producing less things here, right? And so this trade imbalance is just about to hit $1 trillion. That would be unfathomable just 10 years ago, Chip, to even think that that would be possible. We used to have a couple hundred million. Now we're talking $940 billion trade imbalance. So we're having to bring in those goods and services. Now, yes, it's a global economy and we're going to import certain things that we're better at, but that we're not exporting enough of our stuff. In other words, we certainly would import things that we're not going to be the best at making them. And in recent years, that would be electronics, right? So your TVs are usually going to be made in Korea or China or Taiwan or something like that, right? And they're cheaper to import those, but we would export certain products and services back to these countries, and then you have a fair trade agreement. But if we're relying on these other countries too much for our goods and services, that means there's less jobs being created. And again, gets us back into the recessionary environment, things we've been talking about for a while. So this is of major concern for those that are in the know when it comes to understanding how the economy actually works. Not a good thing.
Well, another record surfaced in the news, David. This is from CNBC. Consumer debt hits record $16.9 trillion as delinquencies also rise. What's driving this debt number, David?
The inflation, right? So we've been talking about this for 2+ years now. Inflation is driving the price of goods and services up, and it's getting to the point where you can no longer afford to buy your goods and services. You have to actually borrow money to just pay for the essentials, and this is what the bottom about 35 to 40% of Americans are doing right now. They're putting it on the credit card, and so the credit card is part of this consumer debt. Credit card debt alone, Chip, just surpassed $1 trillion. Again, so we're clear on what $1 trillion, because the number gets thrown around not but a lot by politicians and economists now. It's just a regular part of our vocabulary. If you believe in Jesus Christ like I do, the day he got put on the cross, Chip, if I lent you $1 trillion, you could pay me back $1 a second, as fast as you can hand me dollar bills, and it will take you 32,000 years. So you'd still have 30,000 years to go to pay me back.
Yeah, it's a mind-boggling number, isn't it?
Yeah, it's $1,000 billion, right?
Mm.
And people cannot have a construct of this. Yet our politicians just keep wanting to spend money, spend money, spend money, and this is going to be a problem. And now the consumers are having to spend money on, and they're having to borrow it to get by. And this is not just credit card debt. This is car loans, and this is other things. But what's also really important was in the story is delinquencies are starting to slide up. People can't handle. Interest rates are up, so those credit cards, the biggest chunk of this, the average credit card debt in America is paying 21.6% interest. That's a lot of interest, right? And if you're only making minimum payments, you're basically going to start negative amortizing. In other words, you're going to end up having your balance just continue to grow. And sooner or later, what the credit cards have to do to protect their own financial well-being is they cut you off, right? You might have a $10,000 limit, but you got $7,500 on the card because your balance increases. That goes over $8,000. All of a sudden, they move your balance limit down to $8,000. In other words, they won't let you charge anymore until you get it under control. And again, if we have more job losses like we're starting to see, that's going to lead to more delinquencies. Again, I hate being the bearer of bad news. It seems like doom and gloom. But this is another reason why we think fundamentally the economy is not on good footing.
Well, speaking of doom and gloom, when you see the term death zone in a headline, that's probably not good news.
Can you find a good news story this morning?
Well, we'll lighten it up as we go. Actually, we're going to talk about World War III before we're done here today. But in the meantime, I want to squeeze this in because I know your brother Lou is a mountain climber. I think that's a mountaineering term. The headline from Fox Business is U.S. stocks are in death zone and could sink 26%. Morgan Stanley warns. What is a death zone and what are we talking about here?
Well, I'd have to actually refer to my brother Lou, who is the actual mountain climber. I've never,
All right.
never hiked up more than a hill in reality. But basically, in stock market land, the death zone is where we're kind of sitting between. Just what we talked about, this struggle between are we going to be able to continue growing earnings or not? And the technicals are telling us. And we actually went into this. We crossed the two trend lines this past week, and that put us into this zone. And if the earnings start to fade, as we unfortunately predict they will, and we fall out of the bottom of that zone, it's like a trap door opening sometimes, and we could see the equity markets fall. And we talked about this. We see 15 to 18% retracement in the equity markets as a very realistic probability. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. Okay. Morgan Stanley, on the hand, thinks it's going to go even further. They're talking about 26% retracement in the article. That would take the S&P, which is trading around 4,000 now, all the way down to 3,000.
Well, so some of these stocks are artificially high. There's not enough financial oxygen, so to speak, for them to sustain that level, so they're going to drop precipitously, as
Right,
you just said.
and we had a lot of companies in the last couple of years that are what we call profitless tech companies. They're growing companies. They have unique services, and they were out there, but they're not making any money, and so the investor's going to pull the plug, so to speak. And then we also had the convenience. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. The convenience companies that came out of the pandemic, right? Having clothes delivered to your house, having snacks delivered monthly, all these subscription-based companies, and people are canceling left and right.
Yeah.
Peloton's another great story. They had amazing run up. Everybody was buying these bikes that you pay for a subscription, have a video chat on, and they're crashing and burning now. And because people are having to tighten the wallet, and they're going to cut out the discretionary spending. And so this would not bode well, again, for the equity markets in the near term.
These are unprecedented financial times. Now more than ever, you could use our complimentary report card. No charge, no obligation. We look at your whole financial situation. Maybe you're in good shape. Maybe you need to make a few changes. Now's the time to find out. 402-369-7777. That's a complimentary report card. 402-369-7777. Up next, tax audits are rare, but there are ways you can help avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the IRS. We'll tell you about them next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, here's the headline from Fox Business. Don't risk a tax audit. Here are 4 reasons the IRS may flag your return. Can you run through these warnings for us? 'Tis the season.
Well, people get nervous, obviously, when they think of the IRS, and an audit doesn't have to be unnecessarily this big scary thing. How to handle an audit is really important, though. When the IRS comes calling for an audit, typically they're going to audit you on a particular item. So if you do get that call, you want to just make sure you have competent representation that will take you through it. And I have a good friend that I actually refer people to specifically just for audits. He's got a unique business, and he helps you understand exactly what they're asking for, how to respond to them without having them necessarily go poke around on different things, answer to what they want. But to avoid an audit, there's things you can do to maybe just make your return look a little less offensive, if you will, so that you maybe don't pop up. They have what's called a DIP score at the IRS, that the things that will pop up and say this is somebody we should audit. Now, what's interesting is how few people actually get audited. And that number has gone down over the last decade continually. It's less than 1% of people are ever going to get audited.
They're not even getting the returns done on time, never mind auditing, I guess. So
No. So basically, I think over the most recent study says they audited less than 0.4% of returns, so 0.4%.
Okay.
And now they have different income quadrants that those numbers go up, right? So, but here's the thing: is the IRS is trying to scale with, as we know, 87,000 new IRS agents, and so who are they going to go after? Where's the low hanging fruit? So first of all, they're going to go after middle income. They're not going after millionaire income. They're going to go after the middle of the pack, because these people are not going to take the time to fight or defend.
You're not going to have a legal team to
and
fight
exactly.
off the IRS.
They won't already have these professionals
Easy
on
targets,
staff or retainers.
vulnerable targets,
And
targets
so
of opportunity. Yeah.
And that's just a time value of money. Hey, the
Yeah.
IRS says you owe $20,000. It might cost you $30,000 to defend it.
Yeah.
So you may just write the check.
It's a shakedown.
And
Yeah.
so they're going to go for people earning between maybe $160,000 and maybe $600,000. That area is where we think you're going to see the biggest increase in audits if they proceed with their plan. Because exactly, those are the people that are earning income, can probably have the ability to pay if they find something, and then would do so with the least amount of fighting back. Where if you go after somebody who's making a couple $1 million, exactly, they probably already have more documentation, et cetera. So number one, just make sure you're documenting whatever it is that you're doing. We talk about tax incentives and tax strategies here all the time. There's actually over 1,700 known tax incentives between state, federal, and local municipal tax codes throughout the United States that I'm aware of at this juncture. And of course, new ones come out all the time. We utilize about 60 such strategies here pretty consistently, but each client typically only has to use about 3 or 4. But the key to any of these tax strategies, Chip, is to document, 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 and you have to have documentation of what you did and be able to prove why it was a valid documentation, et cetera. So there's a lot of things we could go into. Probably won't have time today to dig into those, but the 4 red flags the audit people are looking for is if you have excessive credits or deductions to your income. In other words, if you're deducting, let's say you're using a Schedule A for deductions every year. This is where you itemize your deductions, and you have $40,000 in scheduled deductions every year. Maybe you're earning $200,000 as a family, and you got about a $40,000. If one year that spikes to $160,000, that's a red flag because that's not your normal or consistent behavior, and so that would be an audit risk, if you will. Number two is if income just disappears from. Again, they're looking at a pattern here. You file your taxes every year. Their computer program tells you, and most people, it's slightly going to go up as time goes on. But all of a sudden, if you're just missing a big chunk of income for a year and the next year it shows back up, they're going to go back and look. And yes, they can go back and look, and that would be an audit risk as well. And then tax credits. You need to be really careful and understand how tax credits work. These are not deductions. These are actual cash. It's like cash money, right? You get a credit, so that's cash. And if you abuse those credits, you're going to get audited there. And then understanding that your tax return probably needs to have very specific numbers. Round numbers are a red flag. In other words, we spent $20,000 for advertising, 20,000, not $19,843, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put cents on your tax returns, but there's probably, if there's a bunch of round numbers, that looks like you made it up, and that's going to increase the potential that you may get audited. So those are just a few handful of tips. But I will tell those listeners out there, if this is something that concerns you and you've never had someone take a proactive look at your tax return, this is one of the services that Abigail from our Tax Smart division can provide, and we'd be happy to give you a complimentary analysis of your tax return. One, are you at risk for an audit? And two, are you even utilizing all the strategies that are available to you, which, of course, most people, unfortunately, are not.
Don't leave anything on the table if you don't have to. That was CNBC. I think I said Fox Business, but that was a CNBC story. David, while we're talking about the IRS, you sent me this story from the Epic Times. Gun-toting wing of IRS wants to put the fear of God in people. This is an ex-agent, kind of blowing the whistle on his own agency. My goodness.
Well, and look, we're in this political world where everybody's, it's us against them or them against us or whatever. And I wish we weren't, because we can have common sense conversations on a lot of issues, but this one scares a lot of people that are conservative leaning. They believe the IRS is going to viciously target them, and now they talk about gun fearing, putting the fear of God in. And again, we talked about, would this make people maybe, okay, I won't take that deduction, so they pay higher taxes? Or if they took something and somebody challenged it, are they going to fight it? Are they going to be nervous? And so the idea behind this is exactly, I believe they want to put the fear in you so that you will be easier to comply, let's just say, on what they ask you to do. It could be of concern. And again, this is from an IRS agent, and we can give you the link to the story. We don't have time to dig in it today, but we will put the link there at the end of the show for you if you'd like to read that. But people are nervous, Chip, and rightly so. And unfortunately, we know with Lois Lerner here back under 2 presidents ago, under the Obama administration, they did target conservative organizations. In particular, Christian organizations were singled out. Nonprofits were not approved as nonprofits, things like that. We know it happened. And so it's fearful, obviously, that would happen again. And I wish we didn't have these government agencies where, depending on who's in control, they're going to attack different people. That's not the way it was designed to be, and it shouldn't be.
Speaking of people feeling desperate, David, we've got another CNBC story here. Amid persistent inflation, 54% of Americans are using savings to pay for everyday expenses. That's not the plan, right? That's not the way we want things to work.
No, unfortunately, and this is what we just talked about: is the consumer on the bottom half of the income quadrant is really getting crushed right now. They can't afford to pay for everyday services. So they're having to lean on savings and or credit cards. And you get into this, about over half of the 54% are not just using their eating up savings, they're borrowing money, as we talked about, the debt problem we talked about. And again, the consumer they can only last so long, right? And at some point they capitulate and they stop spending, i.e., the earnings and the guidance we just talked about from companies like Home Depot and Walmart this past week. Again, these are signs that the economy is probably slowing down. Now, how aggressive it slows down is up for debate for some people, but I think you're going to see additional job cuts start to shoot across the bow, and this will only exacerbate this unfortunate situation.
You've been on this point for more than a year, that inflation really puts the hurt on people to the middle and lower strata when it comes to income. People who don't have any margin for error in their budgets
Right,
to start with, and then you mix in inflation, and it's a crusher.
I mean, they have to spend 100% of their income just to get by week to week, and unfortunately, some people have to spend more than that and end up
Well, now
having
they're
to
dipping
borrow
into
it
the
or dip into
savings.
savings.
That's the
Yeah.
point, yeah.
I mean, I just had a client who's probably better off than most folks, and they took a couple of grandkids to King Kong. We were doing a review this past week, and he just got a couple of burgers, fries, and a salad, none even drinks, 2 grandkids, him and his wife, and it was $74.
Wow.
He's
Yeah.
like, "Wait, what?" And this is somebody who probably has okay means and was still just shell-shocked at the price, and that's what we're seeing right now is people cannot afford to pay for just everyday things. Fast food, I mean, actually, one of our employees brought in a McDonald's meal the other day, and I'm not somebody that eats a lot of fast food. I was like, "How much is that, quarter pounder meat?" He told me it was like $12.99. I'm like, "For a meal?"
Well, if you get fries and a drink with it, you can't get it
I-
through a drive-through for less than $10 anymore.
Really?
And
So I just don't do that. I don't go through drive-through. So
Yeah.
I knew it was getting up there, but I didn't realize it was like
Other than
$12.
Temperature Tuesday at Runza in January and February, no, you're going to drop at least $10 just getting some kind of sandwich, fries, and a drink these days. Yeah, try taking kids out if you
Yeah.
have children out for. Oh my goodness! All right, so the if it's getting tight, if it's getting a little tight, a little uncomfortable, come see us and get that report card. It's complimentary. There's no charge, no obligation. 402-369-7777. We'll look at your situation, and we've got, as David said, more than 60 different strategies to deal with everybody's situation. 402-369-7777 for a complimentary report card. Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. Q&A is next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the Q&A we go, David. First question is about bonds. If I have bonds that have hit 30 years, what should I do?
Okay, so I got to make some assumptions here because we don't have the answer here. So I assume these are some of the questions we got from the state of the market here.
Yes, exactly. These are our state of the market attendees.
So
with their questions.
what most people are asking about here is they're talking about what's EE bonds, government bonds that you used to buy, like savings bonds. And I used to get those given to us. Like grandparents would buy them for our kids. EE savings bonds mature in 30 years. So to the question, you need to go cash it in. All right, you earn no more interest waiting. So they basically you buy them at a discount and they accrete to the par value. So that's how they pay the interest. And so you need to go cash them in. Now here's the big caveat people need to pay attention to. A lot of people don't. We actually had a client that became on board with us a couple of years ago, but in the initial meetings when we were getting ready to onboard this client, had about 300,000 of these EE bonds of various maturities that within the family. Well, some of them had been matured. The 30 years had run out, and they were 7 or 8 years old. Now, here's the thing, Chip. The interest, you can either pay the interest each year. You can claim the interest. It just accretes in value each year on your tax return. Most people do not. Or you have to claim it in the year it matures. It doesn't matter if you cash the bond or not. The interest is taxable in the year the bond matures. So if you have a bond that you bought in 1987, right? It matured in 2017. And we find this all the time. People walk in, they'll have like $10,000 of EE bonds. Those taxes were due in 2017. And they're not accreting or earning any more interest. And so you need to get them done, and you need to beg for forgiveness to the IRS and file that. Now you're going to claim the tax this year. You're going to claim the income this year, and they're probably going to issue a small penalty for not claiming it in the year you did. But it's very important people understand the tax is due in the year the bond matures if you didn't claim the interest each year, which you can choose to claim it each year, or you can change it, claim it in the year it matures.
What do you recommend? Should you be doing it each year instead of waiting until it matures?
That would depend on your situation, but like right now, I would probably wait if you still had time left because we're want to use every tax dollar right now. The number one strategy we recommend, and we got 3 years left with discounted tax rates, is do Roth conversions. And we actually had somebody meet with their financial advisor, came and met with one of our team members, loved the plan we put together. They went back to their financial advisor just to get a second opinion on it. And he's like, "You'd be crazy to do a Roth conversion." And I was like, "Well, how long has this guy been in the business?"
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Well, 24 years." And I was like, "Well, why doesn't he want you to prepay taxes lower today?"
You say you keep running into this all the time.
Yeah, and,
Would you
and
give people a quick, like 30-second, in case they're not familiar with a Roth conversion? Exactly what is that?
So a Roth conversion is you can, and since 2010, folks, and this is why if you're still with the same advisor for the last 13 years and they haven't given you the strategy, then your advisor's not keeping up. I'm sorry, they're just not paying attention. But since 2010, there's been no caps on income to do Roth conversions. Anybody can do it. You can have no income and make $1 million a year. You can do Roth conversion at any dollar amount you choose. Now, it's a taxable event when you do it. Now, here's the secret, Chip. In 2010, you could have done it and spread your tax bill over 3 years. And nobody told their clients except me, right? I mean, I find no advisors that educated people on this, and a lot of CPAs didn't either, unfortunately, and accountants. And so right now, we have a guaranteed knowledge that in 2 years and 10 months and about a week or so, tax rates are higher.
The Trump tax cuts expired.
Yeah, that's
in
the law.
2026.
So
Mhm.
why not prepay today at a lower rate? You know you can do it. And again, people just don't understand this. Unfortunately, advisors don't get it. And the other problem is the advisors don't have the tools in their toolbox to show people how this works. We have our own proprietary software. We scan the tax returns every year. But this is just one of a myriad of tax strategies that could be viable for people to use.
So take that money that's in a traditional IRA or traditional 401k and move it. And as you say, you'll get taxed on the transaction right now. Take the smaller tax hit now, and then it's sitting there in that Roth, growing.
Grows
And when you want to
tax-free.
withdraw, it's tax free. Even if the Trump tax cuts expire in 2026, you don't have to sweat that because your withdrawals will be tax free.
Now, you need to work with somebody who's experienced and knowledge and understands there's a lot of rules here. But anyway, we'd be happy to run the analysis for you. So let's get on to the next
David,
question there.
CDs, which you sometimes call certificates of disappointment. The question is, can you discuss brokered CDs versus bank CDs?
Okay, so a CD is a certificate of deposit. I do joke about disappointment because the rates were so low. A 1-year CD average from bank rate this week was over 3.6%. So at least the rates are getting up. The problem is that's only half of what inflation currently is. So you're still losing. You're still going to be disappointed. And the interest you earn on that CD is taxable federally and state. Okay. So just so you know, there are alternatives right now. We can buy treasuries. We can buy T-bills that mature every 4 to 8 weeks right now and get over 4.5%, and you don't have to pay state income tax on those. But anyway, that's just one little trick. All right, now the difference between a brokered CD and a what the questioner is asking is a bank CD. A bank CD is issued by the bank. Your local bank issues the CD. They're collecting deposits. Brokered CDs just mean when I started my career, that's how I used to open accounts. We had CDs paying 9.5%, 10% back 24 years ago. Yeah. And so we could broker CDs from banks all over the country. I had inventory just on my screen from banks anywhere in the country. And so a brokered CD is just that. It's sold through a brokerage, and we're going to get a little commission there, but we're able to go shop rates all over the country for you instead of you just going to your local bank and they offer you X rate and that's your only choice. Now, the downside to that is the brokered CDs, you may not have ever heard of the bank. You may not like that, whatever you might want to name, but they're not going to be much of a difference. Now, what there also is, Chip, is there's what's called index CDs, equity index CDs. These can work similar to like a fixed annuity, and they haven't been real popular because rates are so low. But the downside to these is you are truly locked in for the time period. And these may become popular again in the near future. In other words, your CD is still FDIC insured up to the $250,000 limit. So like you put it in there, maybe it's a 5-year maturity. But if you sold it prior to maturity, you could actually lose money in that situation. But if you hold to maturity, you can't lose money, and you may get a much higher rate of return than a fixed rate because it may be indexed to a market like the S&P or something. So those are unique opportunities. They're still not as attractive yet, but if interest rates keep going, and we think they're gonna, they may become a very viable option here real soon.
Well, there's the segue because the next question is about interest rates. Do you believe the Fed should continue raising interest rates in 2023? If so, how high?
I believe they need to get it over with. So if it were me, I'd raise them 150 basis points at the next meeting and be
Whoa.
done. Because
That'd be a shockwave, but at least then it's in the rearview mirror.
but they're not going to stop until they get the prescribed result. And what they're looking for, and they won't tell you this, folks, but they need, and just so you know, CPI, which came in hot last week, a little hotter than expected, 6.4, they just changed the calculation again because the government spends a lot of money based off of CPI, right? Those are COLA adjustments in Social Security, pensions for the military and for government workers, raises for the government workers are all based off this. So our spending is tied to this. So they have a, let's call it a vested interest chip in suppressing that number if at all possible. So every once in a while they'll tweak subtly how they calculate it. Well, just so you know, the recent calculation, they just took basically real estate or shelter, right? Rent equivalents or mortgage cost, the cost of housing, and pushed that number from a just under 35% calculation to 44 plus percent of the calculation now. And they also went to a 1 year look back versus a 2 year look back. And so this will change the way real estate calculates, and it'll lower CPI in about 8 or 9 months. It's going to make the Fed look like geniuses this time next year. The problem is they need real estate to go down 10 to 15% nationwide for that to work. So how do you do that? Well, they're not going to tell you. They keep saying soft landing. They just want to crash the housing market. That's what they really want. And so, and the problem is they need to raise rates 100 to 150 basis points more. But if they do a quarter hikes like they just did this last time, it will take all year to get the same effects. So we're going to drag out and we're going to become stagflation, something we experienced, those of us old enough, in the 70s. That's worse than a recession. Rip the Band-Aid off. That's my opinion. Make what happens going to happen. We're preparing our clients for it, okay? And then we'll be able to start growth on the other side. And then in sometime next spring, they'll be able to start reversing the interest rates. The other problem is the Fed can only raise so high, Chip. We can't pay our bills if they keep raising rates. Our interest payments have gone up. Our federal debt payments have gone up over $250 billion in the last 12 months because of these federal interest rate guides. So that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So why not just go higher? And you know they're going to go lower later. Rip it off, create what they need to create, even though they won't tell you that, and be done with it.
David, let's squeeze in one more. Young investors. Do you have programs for young investors? Education seminars, investing 101, things like that?
So we have a Start Smart program we've been working on for some time. We haven't officially launched it, but we work with kids of our clients, complimentary a lot of times, is something we provide. But we will be launching Start Smart hopefully by the end of this year. So more to come. We do have a program for them, but it's not our general focus today. We are focused typically on those that are at or near retirement.
David, we're out of time for Q&A this week, but how many openings do we have if people would like to call in and schedule a 15-minute phone conference with one of our advisors?
These have become really popular again, so we work the calendar. So we have 12 of those available. Again, we have 10 licensed advisors now on our team. We keep expanding and growing our team, and so we're able to facilitate a few more of those calls right now, so we can do 12 this coming week.
What can people expect out of this 15-minute phone conference?
Look, you're gonna talk with one of our staff. Somebody's going to set the appointment. We're going to schedule a time. We're going to call you typically on your cell phone if that's what you like. And you can step out from work if it's during work hours, et cetera. And we'll just answer your most pressing questions. This is no obligation. And so we're just going to basically help steer you in the right direction. Now, we may be able to give you additional resources, information based on that call. We may be able to send you some of the guides or white papers that we have in our arsenal. We have a lot of material, and we may even we may even offer invite you into one of our education classes that happens at the Midwest Learning Center, depending on what the topic is that you want. But again, this is an easy way for people to no obligation to just get something answered, at least find if they're in the right direction, whether it's inheritance questions, estate taxes, income taxes, risk management, portfolios, economy, you name it.
402-369-7777. No charge, no obligation. 15-minute phone conference with one of our advisors. 402-369-7777. Up next, concern grows that the war in Ukraine could be the catalyst for a larger, even global conflict. We'll examine that next and what it might mean for financial markets. You're listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, I do want to get to this chatter about, is a World War III looming? But before that, you have been on this point, well, going all the way back to the pandemic. Don't be that person. Don't be the remote worker. There's a New York Times story that says, laid off in your living room, the chaos of remote job cuts. You've said for a long time, don't be that person, because if the cuts come, the one who's not there is probably going to be the first one cut.
Look, it's just reality. Amazon just this past week demanded that all their remote workers be back in the office starting Monday, 3 days a week minimum. So they'll let them do a little bit of a hybrid schedule. But I'm just telling you, productivity is gone down, and it's across the globe now from remote workers. There are certain industries where remote workers can still probably work proficiently, but not all industries and not all jobs. And in our culture here, we talk about it. We are an at work facility. All right. I need you here every day because my schedule is pretty hectic, as anyone that works here knows. I mean, you guys have me booked out literally every 15 minutes. I'm someplace I'm supposed to be, and I just have to look at my phone and be directed. And I have Mary, who's my executive assistant, who "Yeah, you're supposed to be in this room. And if I'm running behind, it can chaotic. But every once in a while, I'll get a 15-minute open window chip, and I just like to walk around the office and do check-ins, whether it's somebody's office or cubicle or what have you, and just see how they're doing. And I can't do that if you're a remote worker. Now, full disclosure, we do have a couple of remote workers, but that's because they kind of started here. Like one of our workers started working here and was transferred military for spouse elsewhere, and so we allowed her to continue to work, and it's working out. But it's not something I am anticipating doing any more of. It's just not my culture. Now, all these other companies did this basically 'cause it was a necessity, right? Remote work was almost a necessity during the pandemic, and productivity actually soared the first year. It really did because people were excited. They were home. They were still getting paid. The fear of losing their job went away because the COVID. There was lots of layoffs and all that, and so it was a good time, and people kind of flourished for a while. Well, that's over now, and people are, well, let's just put it politely, Chip. People are taking advantage of the situation in some circumstances, and now a lot of people don't even realize that companies have technology. We know exactly how many keystrokes are on your laptop, how often you're logged into your email. All that is collected. Any company of any size has all this data. And if you don't know, then you're not being very smart. And these companies know if you're really working. And so when it comes time to the economy's slowing down, recession, we're gonna have to cut some people. Who are they going to cut first? Well, out of sight, out of mind, unfortunately, they're going
Yeah.
to cut remote workers. And we just had somebody recently, a client's kid got laid off, and they were telling me about it in a review. And it was a shock to them because there wasn't even a phone call. It was just an email. Your employment has come to an end officially at this reading of this email. Please drop your stuff. Here's a FedEx box. We're showing up to your house
Yikes.
this afternoon. Turn in all your
Wow.
nothing. Twitter. They fired over 3,500 employees at midnight. They all got a text message you were terminated. And
Yeah.
so companies don't even have the heart anymore, and they're just going to cut because again, there's the emotional tie is gone if you don't see the person every day. So again, I caution people, and a lot of younger folks I know love the idea of working remotely. If your company gets the bandwidth tightens up, it may be a struggle. It may be rough. You may be the one cut. Now, here's the other problem, Chip, is this leads obviously getting laid off in general is a big hit mentally, right? It's not something you're going to weather the storm well. You feel difficult. So people will go through depression. Mental health issues are already struggling in this country as it is. And this is only going to exacerbate or increase that because people are going to be isolated, sitting in their apartment or their home or their basement and haven't worked. I mean, I go to church with a very good friend of mine, leads a life group, and his company, he went remote for a while and he was excited to get back in the office. They decided to get rid of the real estate to save money. Now he's permanently remote and he's starting to miss some of the interaction. And he's actually still performing well, but that's a concern because you're not seeing your boss every day. You're not seeing, and it's just scheduled Zoom meetings. And the other thing is, I think companies lose out what we call water cooler innovation. Meet somebody in the coffee room or the break room. Chip, I got an idea for you. As I often do for you, I'll come by and hand you a story. But
Yeah.
it's off the cuff. It's not
Mhm.
we don't have a scheduled Zoom meeting or what have you.
No.
And so
It's just a natural
yeah,
rhythm to it.
and
There's
that
a
goes
mojo.
away.
There's a
So
synergy.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I
Yeah.
just again,
Mhm.
remote workers is certain industries will hang on to it, but a lot of folks that work remotely today are going to be surprised to find out that won't be the culture in the next year or two, in my humble opinion.
David, in the time we have left, I want to get your take on this. There's increasing chatter in political circles and financial circles. Are we drifting toward a global conflict, a World War III? We just hit the 1 year anniversary now for the war in Ukraine. The United States, $100 billion so far. I think another 500 million was just proposed. The president just showed up in Ukraine recently, so we're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. It seems.
Oh yeah,
And
the irony there.
China,
President's Day, and he chose
well,
to show up in Ukraine, maybe not,
well,
maybe in East Palestine, where we have
yeah,
a major rail derailment,
yeah,
and people have a lot of questions.
or the southern border, maybe
Yeah.
our border. But in China, what's China gonna do now? at Retire Smart, we track political developments, local, state, national, global, because they affect financial markets. They
Yeah.
affect people's portfolios. I want to know, what are you seeing in your crystal ball, David? Is this just chicken little chatter, people running around, World War III? Or are we in danger of an expanding conflict that could affect financial markets?
Look, I know a lot of people are nervous, like, about World War III. I don't necessarily see World War III. What I see is the new Cold War. That's what I see now.
Ah, okay.
So I grew up in the Cold War years, right? We did have
Yeah.
conflicts in the 70s and 80s, like Vietnam had ended, but I was so young, when that had ended. I was only about 6 or 7 years old, so not delved into my memory Vietnam, but we quickly branched into after that into the Cold War, right? Going back to Khrushchev and and Reagan again, the tearing down the Berlin Wall. So that was a unique time, and of course that's why I have a love for spy thrillers and movies. Just the time I grew up. But I think we're going into this new kind of intelligence era and Cold War where you're just seeing who is going to partner with who. And right now, who are we seeing? Our two biggest adversaries, I would say, globally today, Russia and China, are warming up to each other a little bit right now, and that's the concern I have because they can collectively change the trade industry. They can change globally economics by choosing to deal with each other versus dealing with the West, so to speak, in certain instruments. And of course, then there's other areas. Taiwan is still an issue for China, right? And if that were to become a conflict, do we defend Taiwan as we've said we would? We don't know.
Mhm.
We're defending Ukraine, obviously. And then shipping lanes, though, that supply chain damage would be almost insurmountable. That would put us into a global recession for probably 3 to 5 years. That would be pretty rough economic period. But you're right. We track all this stuff. But as I see it today, yeah, hopefully diplomacy still works out. But again, you've got an administration that, in my humble opinion, again, is pretty weak on the international front. They don't operate. This administration, in my opinion, doesn't operate from a stance of strength, which is typically the way America's done. And so it seems like we're getting taken advantage of. As you mentioned, Ukraine. I talked about this at our State of the Market. You know, sure, I'd love Ukraine and Russia to settle down and the war not happen and sovereign lines be. But why are we funding Ukraine at the level we're doing when we're not taking care of our own issues here first? That's my problem. There's only 43 million people in the entire country of Ukraine, and we're up to 118 billion last I checked of aid we have given, just our country, right? Hey, Chip, that's over 1,800 a month since the war started for every citizen of Ukraine. Imagine if we did that to our, and we're talking about they want to cut benefits here or cut Medicare or all these other things here. Why are we taking care of someone else before taking care? And if we can help the world, that's great if it's in with reason. But yeah, so the rhetoric of
You're
World War III, I don't see it happening yet. Doesn't mean it doesn't. But do we end up with boots on the ground? Unfortunately, that's probably a reality.
you're a student of history. I want to get your take on this. I want to run this by you, see what you think. The Soviet Union was politically and economically communist. I would say China definitely politically communist, but economically, China practices a lot of capitalism. It's not pure, but that's why it's had a much higher standard of living. That's why I think the communist regime is still alive in China, and it went down in the Soviet Union because it ruined its own economy. I'm hopeful. Well, the trade deficit we talked about at the beginning of the show, who's buying all the stuff China's manufacturing? We are. That China, if China puts the hurt on the USA, it's going to put the hurt on China. It's going to hurt its economy. Maybe that's a factor that will dampen some of the war fever and keep things from getting out of hand because there's an economic interest in China that we're in
Well,
decent enough shape to
and
buy their products.
and they own quite a bit of our debt, and so they would
Now
like to
that too.
they would like to get
They
paid.
wanna get paid.
They would like
Yeah,
to get paid.
yeah.
And you're right. They practice what I call restrictive capitalism, right? They're a communist nation from the government, one party, what's good for the party, what's good for the nation type
Yeah.
of thing. But they understand the economic viability of what they can produce to get them money to build cities. I mean, they have over 35 cities larger than New York City, right? People, if you've never been to China, and I've not, but I just studied it. It's an amazing place, right? And they weren't always communists. Again, for our younger listeners, China was once an amazing free banyan of free will and a unique culture, and they've been communist now for a while. But that may turn at some point. But that alone, just what you talked about, is why I don't see World War III necessarily happening. But I think we're going into more of this Cold War-esque kind of era. The other thing is people worry, oh, is the dollar going to go away? No, the China yuan does not trade freely, right? And that would, so if we use China's currency, which some people think we're going to go to, they would have to let it ping against the world freely, and they don't. They set the rate right now, and so until that changes, there's no way the dollar loses its reserve status. So that that you can put that one to rest for a short period.
Well, David, let's take stock of what we're offering this week. So that sticky inflation is still around. So we've got the inflation guide. We have 12 openings if you'd like to schedule a 15-minute call with one of our financial advisors. Of course, we have the tried and true report card, complimentary review of your entire financial situation. And don't forget about the Baby Boomer Dilemma movie, Wednesday night, March 1st, 6:30 at the ACX Theater. That's at 204th and Harrison. We'd love to have you join us, but you need to call to register, 402-369-7777. And that's the magic number for everything we offer this week, 402-369-7777. David, bring us home.
Hey, have a blessed and prosperous week. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week.